Thank you for listening to Upaya's Dharma podcast, an extraordinary series of talks from some of the finest teachers in the world. I'm Joan Halifax, founder of the Upaya Zen Center, and we're happy to make these podcasts available to you. Please consider making a donation so we can offer these recordings freely. You'll find a donation button on our podcast page. And thank you so much.
This is Dharma Podcast at dharmapodcast.org. This is episode number 1869. It was recorded on June 16th, 2021, and it is titled The Poetry of Awareness on an Ordinary Day. The speaker for this episode is James Bristol.
Welcome, and welcome to everybody that's out there on YouTube and Zoom. It certainly was my sort of saving grace over the last year during COVID to keep up my practice. So I appreciate it. So I think, today's topic is the poetry of awareness on an ordinary day. And I think the first order of awareness would be the fact that I think my mom is on YouTube. So I want to give a shout out to Mom and tell her I love her. So I think I should start with thanking Roshi. God, it's too early to already get choked up. Anyway, so Roshi and I, we did meet in 1998, and certainly we've crossed a lot of paths over the years and walked a lot of paths, whether it's in France or Japan or Nepal, walked a lot of paths in Nepal. But I think the most important path was the path right here and to the practice of Zen. So thank you, Roshi. She's up at Prajna, so I'm sending her good thoughts. And I want to thank Cato, who I sort of traverse all paths in life. And then I want to thank you all. It's great. It's really great to be here with you. And, I watch your feet go by in front of my cushion, and it sort of takes me to thoughts out into the world and all the people sort of in the zendo of the world, and how important it is the work that we do here and the work that we eventually can do out in the world, the bigger world. So, as you know, we're sort of in the shoulder season, I would say, between the spring practice period and the fall practice period, where we studied Shantideva's The Way of the Bodhisattva. And in the fall, we're going to be studying the Bodhisattva Way by Vimalakirti. And we're also in the middle of the Socially Engaged Buddhism training, that year-long course. I'm a part of that as well. And so really the focus this whole year has been on the path of caring and sort of how we alleviate suffering in the world, especially from the perspective of, social action, social engagement. And so, with that in mind, today's June 16th, and it's Bloomsday. And, being an English major in college, Bloomsday is, it's the day that around the world they celebrate Ulysses, the novel by James Joyce. And it's the ordinary day, the 24-hour day in the life of Leopold Bloom, the central character in Ulysses. And so thinking about the ordinary day, and I thought about a question, that gave rise to what I'm talking about today. And it was a question that came to me a number of times by people that were participating in the practice interviews in the spring practice period. And the question essentially boiled down to, how do I take this sitting practice out into the world, into my day-to-day activities? And so, I think that question came to me more often than not because, as a novice priest, also am a lawyer and a divorce lawyer. And so in that capacity, work like all of us, work full time, tend to family, tend to friends, and just tend to the day-to-day of life. And so I think that's why I got the question. And so I thought about it a lot. And so I want you to take a couple minutes, and everybody listening on the internet, take a few minutes and think about, how do you take your sitting practice into the day-to-day of your life? Years ago when I was a seminarian at Loyola University in Chicago, I was assigned in this summer, it's like an internship, but it was a summer placement, and it was a church just on the edge of the campus of Washington and Lee in Lexington, Virginia. And one of my tasks over the course of the summer was to go down onto the on-campus housing and visit Paul. And Paul was bedridden. He was a retired professor of chemistry. And he lived in this old house, probably built in 1900. It was basically, 2 rooms on the bottom floor, 2 rooms on the second floor, and divided by a staircase. And Paul was downstairs in the living room. And his house was wall to wall, even on the ceilings, covered in art, and thousands of books. And I would go over there to visit him, and he'd say, "Oh, go and explore." So I'd go upstairs and I'd be looking at all the art. I mean, just amazing art hanging on the walls, and looking at all these books, like thousands of books that were set up in stacks, like you were in a library, all famous titles. And then I'd go back downstairs and I'd get into conversations with Paul, and he would tell me about, growing up in Iowa, or, being an armchair entomologist, or his 40 plus years of being a professor of chemistry. But I think the thing that struck me the most about Paul was when you would ask him, I'd say, "How are you?" And he'd sort of get this big smile, and he'd say, "Well, I'm fine, because I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing now." So he's bedridden. He's doing what he's supposed to be doing now. End of his life, his heart is failing him. Again, he's bedridden. And I was just thinking to myself, wow, he's so aware, so aware. And showing up to this moment, a moment to me that seems so difficult. But here's Paul, doing what he's supposed to be doing now. So how do we, I think about this, how do all of us show up to this moment, moment by moment, through all the good things, through all the bad things? How do we show up? And how do we live here in this moment with integrity, especially as Zen practitioners? Roshi says that Zen is the path of discovery. So how on this path that we're on, this Zen path, this road we're on, what is it revealing to us? And how do you notice what it's revealing? And when you do, what happens to you? So I think there are a number of ways to sort of attune to the moment, to sort of turn things down, to quiet down, to slow down, and attune. And attune is really particular. It's not drowning in something or wallowing in something or getting carried away by it. It's standing next to it, noticing it, and asking the question, what is this? And staying flexible and curious. And an anchor point for me to attune is awareness. And I'm going to start with sort of a basic tenet that I think guides awareness. And it goes back to our 13th century friend Dogen, out of the Genjo Koan. And I would imagine everyone in here has heard this, and many people that are listening online have heard this. But I think it's very useful to talk about and understand with more depth, because I know I struggle with it. So I imagine many people may struggle with it. And it's a simple translation, but to study the Buddha way is to study the self. And to study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be awakened by all things of the universe. So again, I think when you've settled yourself and you're sitting with this, you probably struggled with what Dogen says here. So to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be enlightened by all things of the universe. And, we're taught to focus on our breath. We count our breaths, 1, 2, and we have these thoughts. And we're told, it's like train cars. Each one of the individual cars is a thought, and it's just coming and going. Or you could think about it like a freeway. All these cars just racing by, and you're not running out into traffic. You're not flagging somebody down for a ride. Although sometimes we tend to flag somebody down for a ride, and you get caught on this thought for a long time. And then all of a sudden you realize your breath counts at like 82, 83, then you go back to 1, 2, 3, and thoughts come and go. And breath sweeps the mind. And in the midst of this, I'm studying the self, forgetting the self, as Dogen says. So sitting is really studying the nature of the mind. And even if you're not thinking, you're awareing mind, being with it, noticing it, awake to it, and your awareness is active. These thoughts that go through your brain as we breathe in and out are really the phenomenon that your brain is secreting. Those triggers, the values, the needs, the wants, the desires, the self-loathing, the negative thoughts, all of those, they come and they go. No attachment. You're not falling down the rabbit hole. You're not flagging down that semi-truck of thought. The semi-truck's there, but you're not attaching yourself to it. You're not that thought. So you study that you yourself have these thoughts, but you're not that thought, and they're not you. They're temporal. They're made up from your experience. So we're not captivated by this train of thoughts, of thinking. So to study the Buddha way is to study the self, and to study the self is to forget the self. And I don't know how much we're actually forgetting as if differentiating. You yourself have these thoughts, but these thoughts are really not you. The self sort of falls away, the thoughts in you. And we become this awareing I, this seat of consciousness, or Buddha nature. And we begin to see, I have these thoughts. Here they come, there they go. But I'm not trapped by my thoughts. And now I aware more than the thoughts that my brain is secreting, more than the negative thoughts or the self-loathing or the desires or the wants. And in the forgetting, we are inviting ourselves, you're inviting yourself to be awakened by all things of the universe. Can you see that you're not separate, but a part of all things? And the more that we practice this, the more this unfolds. So I read a quote recently by John Cage, the avant-garde 20th century composer, and it's really helped me with this. And John Cage says, There is poetry as soon as we realize we possess nothing. There is poetry as soon as we realize we possess nothing. So close your eyes and settle yourself a minute. Focus on your breath. Think about your sitting. Strong back, soft front. And those thoughts. Yeah, I need to buy more coffee. How should I deal with that difficult client? No, I forgot to call my mom. My sister's in the hospital. I'm afraid. Thoughts coming, going. No attachment. You're not your thoughts. You come back to the breath. In, out. In, out. There's poetry as soon as we realize we possess nothing. You can open your eyes. So it's from this place of sitting that we learn how the mind works. We learn where the narrative, the sequence of thoughts begins to just fall away. And eventually, the secretion of thoughts, we aren't tripped up by it anymore. It derails us less and less. And we get out of the way of our own thoughts, and our true nature can unfold. The symphony of all that is out there can unfold. There's no separation, only profound connection. And from that, wisdom, compassion, insight, all unfold. And it's just that easy. In fact, it's effortless. It takes no effort on our part. And it's comforting because we don't need to improve upon it. So awareness on an ordinary day. Awareness for me is a wonderful koan, because what happens in the day-to-day, in the simple and in the complex, can be very profound. You can have what I've heard Sensei Kathy Fisher call a stark moment. When you're sort of just going along minding your own business and the moment just clobbers you. A number of years ago, my grandma was diagnosed with cancer and lung cancer. And she was in her mid-80s. And she went into hospice. And months before this, my mom had been trained in hospice. And she had no idea this was, the path that was coming. But she was prepared. And so she went to visit her mom. And as she was trained, she crawls into bed with her. And it was toward the end, but my grandma was still very present. And my mom said, Mom, I love you. And my grandmom is like, I love you, honey. And then she turned and aspirated off the side of the bed and turned back and died. Now, certainly this is a stark moment. Life was not the same after that. It's like Joan Didion, she wrote in The Year of Magical Thinking. She's like, I sat down to dinner and life as I knew it ended. Her husband had a heart attack and died at the table. So, what have the stark moments been in your life? And how have they impacted you? And with the knowledge of that stark moment, how did you respond? So the stark moments can be quite profound and really inform us, especially if we're aware. But it doesn't only take the stark moments. What happens in the ordinary day-to-day, the day in and day out of our lives, can be just as profound and have just as much impact as those stark moments. It's sort of like the simple flow of water moments. Water that could eventually cut the Grand Canyon, but right now it's just a simple flow of water. Like, what kind of awareness do you have just in your daily walk with your dog? Or when a coworker confides in you? Or just being outside smelling the rain? Or in a conversation with a friend? Or your child's smile? Awareness of what is right in front of you during your ordinary day. About a month ago, just a second. About a month ago, I was in a flat bottom boat on the Pacific coast of Guatemala, just sort of exploring the mangroves. And the intercoastal waterway, like if this is the ocean, and then you've got a whole like huge amount of sand, and it's the beach, and it goes over, and there's another waterway on the other side of it. And so we're in the intercoastal waterway, and on both sides of the waterway, these dense mangroves grow, and they look like magnolia trees, but the root system is just, it hangs down into the water, but a lot of the roots are completely out of the water, and it's very, very dense. So we're going along. Oh, and the interesting thing, I shouldn't go into this, but mangroves are on either side of the equator, all the way up to the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer. It's the only place you'll find them in the world. And they are only in sweet water, water that's half salt water and half, or I don't know what the percentage is, but salt water and fresh water. And they're the world's filtering system. So they're really necessary, and all sorts of countries are enacting laws to protect them. So anyway, finding an opening in the mangrove is difficult, but we found an opening. And it was a little opening, and it opened up onto the beach side. So, where it opened, we pulled the boat up, and we meet Julio and Rosa and their adult children and grandchildren. And over the beach, down to the ocean, they have all of this black plastic set up. And, we're like, oh, what are they doing? Well, they're harvesting salt. And so what they're doing is the whole family they're pumping ocean water up into the black salt or the black tarp, and it goes down these berms and it pools into these spots in the flow of the black plastic and dries out, and there's sand left. And it's a 4-month season that ended about the time that we visited them. And so they were harvesting all the salt, and they were scooping the salt into these recycled sugar sacks so that they could, that's the only sack they had, but each one of those sacks would hold about 100 pounds of salt. And they got about 100 bags of salt, and they'd load them on the flat bottom boats and take them to the market to sell. And they would get about 20 quetzales for each 100-pound bag of salt. So over the 4-month course of all of this hard work, traipsing around in the sun and in the sand in bare feet, they would make about $260. And Julio thrust his hand out in front of me, and I took a little pinch of the salt and I tasted it. And he said, fuerte, strong. During sesshin, before each one of the meals, we chant the gatha before meals. And we say, 72 laborers brought us this food. We should know how it comes to us. So here's Rosa and Julio's salt. And I'll never look at salt the same. So, what have you noticed about the ordinary moments in your day? And how has it influenced you? So, ordinariness, or I should say awareness during an ordinary day, can also be thinking about thinking. So, metacognition, sort of looking at yourself in a situation and how you respond to that situation. And certainly for me, working with people who are divorcing, it can be, as I'm sure many people know, very toxic, very negative. And when you're doing it year in and year out, it doesn't always work to bring the best self forward, So when I'm in a difficult conversation with a client, sometimes that best self doesn't come out. And I may say something I shouldn't or not be as sensitive as I could be. But I'll tell you what, I work very hard to listen and very hard to sort of step back and try to aware and think about where they're coming from. So go to a place of deeper awareness, awareing the moment and awareing the difficulty that the person's going through. So when you notice yourself in a difficult situation and how you respond, whether it's with coworkers or with your family, or when you're deeply presencing someone, really presencing them, or looking deeply at any moment of your day, you start to see that there's no separation, just a profound and deep connection, a deep connection without boundaries. And it's a connection that's always been there. So our practice of awareness and then the action from that, our reaction from that, there's a dialogue that goes on between the two. And we need some amount of spaciousness to really understand the dialogue and be aware and notice. So can we open ourselves to the mysterious nature of the mind, especially in the midst of a difficult situation? And be aware, that guy cut me off, or that client screamed at me. And from that place, step back, slow down, try to move out of what our habitual reaction would be, and just take notice and be aware of what the other where they're acting from. Oh, I'm noticing that they're really upset, and this is having a reaction in me. I'm feeling defended or guarded, and you just take a step back and slow down and quiet and ask, what is this? What do you need to know in that situation? Oh, they're triggered because of fear or anger or sadness or the swirl of all of these things. And in the slowing down, in taking the time that we need to sort of comprehend or aware all of that information, we can respond differently. We can proact rather than react. And from that place, certainly wisdom and compassion and courage, calmness, clarity, they can all come forward. And when we reach deep into the practice that it takes to get to this place, this practice of awareness that informs our activities, certainly we can act differently with wisdom to relieve the pain and suffering that we're going to encounter, and do it day in and day out where we are and when we can. And this is really what is the poetry of awareness on an ordinary day. And when we act from this place of awareness, you're really acting from your pure self. Let's just say a place of love, pure love. And when we act from a place of pure love, there is, no weight, no question. We're not acting out of requirement. We're not acting out of expectation. We're not shoulding on ourselves. I should do this or I should do that. We act from our best self. And this certainly isn't easy. Showing up like this can be very difficult, which is why we practice, action, awareness, being, doing, being, like Dogen says. And then when we're practicing on this level, we learn that awareness sort of deepens and also unfolds over time. Awareness isn't going to be just slap you in the face all the time. It unfolds. Think about beach glass by the ocean. You're walking along and there's a fresh, broken piece of glass and you step on it, it's going to cut your foot. But over time and with practice, and in this case with water and sand, the edges of the glass are smoothed and it's transformed, and it's no longer a thing that is cutting, but a thing of beauty. So our awareness deepens and unfolds as we practice. Roshi likes to say, enlightenment is accidental, but practice makes you accident prone. So practice. What I love about Zen and what I love about this practice of Zazen is that, and practice every single day, is that it asks us to step back and to look beyond the obvious and to really get to the deeper truth of things and come back again and again and again. Stephen Batchelor talks about this as always asking the question. And, I've said it a few times in this talk tonight. What is this? And it's not necessarily asking the question to get an answer. It's, asking the question. That's the important part. And then paying attention to the sensation that the question brings out in you. But you keep asking the question. And you develop a sense of openness to the moment, to the wonder of the moment. How do you aware? And when you do, what happens? During the evening gatha, we say, life and death are of supreme importance. Time passes swiftly and opportunity is lost. Awaken, awaken, take heed. So awaken. Let's get out there, as you are, and do good in the world the way that you can from what you know and even what you don't know. We'll see if we can do what my friend Paul says. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing now. I think of Joanna Macy at the beginning of the socially engaged Buddhism training. She said, who said you have to be successful? She's like, just show up. So just show up to what's right in front of you. Bring yourself fully. Exclude nothing. Bring every cause and condition. Fully awake, fully aware on this path of your life, knowing that you are connected to all things of the universe.